The wagon lurched to a stop in front of St. Catherine's Church, and before Miranda Vale could fully comprehend what was happening, rough hands seized her arms and dragged her from the wooden bed, where she had spent 3 miserable days bouncing across the New Mexico territory. Her uncle's voice, cold and final as winter frost, cut through the hot June air of 1878. "This is where you get off, girl. Should have thought twice before bringing shame on the family." Miranda stumbled as they released her, falling hard onto the dusty church steps. Her carpet bag landed beside her with a thud that sent up a small cloud of red dirt. She spun around, auburn hair whipping across her tear-stained face, but the wagon was already pulling away. Her aunt wouldn't even look at her, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead as if Miranda had already ceased to exist. "Please, I did nothing wrong. Uncle Thomas, please listen to me." Her voice cracked, desperation clawing at her throat. The accusations were lies, all lies. The banker's son had tried to force himself on her at the church social, and when she fought back and escaped with her dress torn, he had claimed she had tried to seduce him. Her word meant nothing against his in Virginia. Her uncle, more concerned with his standing in the community than the truth, had decided the easiest solution was to make her someone else's problem. The wagon wheels kicked up dust as it turned the corner onto the main street of Fort Sumner, disappearing from view. Miranda sat there on the steps, trembling, abandoned in a town where she knew not a single soul. She had $5 to her name, 2 dresses, a Bible, and nowhere to go. The June sun beat down mercilessly. Fort Sumner stretched before her, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures that seemed to shimmer in the heat. Somewhere a dog barked. The sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons down the street. Life continued around her as if her world had not just shattered into pieces. Inside the church, Dalton Dawson knelt in the 3rd pew from the front, hat resting on the worn wood beside him. His hands were clasped so tight his knuckles had gone white. The small Catholic church was dim and cool, a refuge from the blazing sun and from the thoughts that had been plaguing him for weeks. "Lord, I know I have not been the best man," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. "I have killed when I had to. I have taken what I needed to survive. But I am trying to be better. I am trying to find purpose in this life beyond the next gunfight, the next cattle drive, the next dollar." He paused, swallowing hard. "Father Martinez says you have a plan for all of us. If that is true, I am asking you to show me mine. I am 32 years old and I feel older than the hills. I am tired, Lord, tired of being alone, tired of wondering if this is all there is." The sound of something hitting the steps outside filtered through the heavy wooden doors. Dalton lifted his head, listening. A wagon departing quickly. A woman's voice calling out, high and frightened. Then silence. He sat there for a long moment, uncertainty holding him in place. Father Martinez had gone to visit the sick on the other side of town. Dalton was alone in the church, or so he had thought. The cry he had heard tugged at something deep in his chest, something he thought had died years ago when he found his family's homestead burned to the ground, his parents and sister killed in a Comanche raid. Conscience won out over caution. Dalton rose, settling his hat on his dark hair, and walked down the aisle. His boots echoed on the stone floor. When he pushed open the heavy door, the bright sunlight made him squint. A woman sat crumpled on the steps, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. A worn carpet bag lay beside her, and her dress, though clean, had seen better days. Even in her obvious distress, something about her struck him. The curve of her neck, the way the sunlight caught the red in her hair, the complete vulnerability of her posture. Dalton cleared his throat. "Miss, are you hurt?" She started violently, scrambling to her feet so quickly she nearly fell again. Dalton instinctively reached out to steady her, but she flinched away from his touch. Her eyes, he saw now, were a remarkable shade of green, currently swimming with tears and fear. "I am sorry. I did not mean to frighten you," he said, keeping his voice gentle and taking a step back to give her space. "I was praying inside and heard a commotion. Are you in some kind of trouble?" Miranda stared at the man before her. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His face was angular and weathered, probably somewhere in his 30s, with dark eyes that seemed kind despite the hard set of his jaw. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy: worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. The gun belt made her nervous, but everything about this situation made her nervous. My uncle left me here," she managed, hating how weak her voice sounded. "I have nowhere to go." Dalton frowned. What kind of man abandoned a young woman in a rough town like Fort Sumner? The town had been trying to establish itself as respectable, but it still had more than its share of outlaws and drifters. Billy Bonney had been through here just last month, and the tension between cattlemen and farmers kept everyone on edge. "Left you, just like that." He could not keep the anger from his voice. "Does he not know the kind of men who pass through here?" "He does not care," Miranda said bitterly. The truth of it cut deep. Her own blood had thrown her away like refuse. "He believes. It does not matter what he believes. It is not true, but he will not hear my side of it." Dalton studied her for a long moment. She met his gaze, and he saw no deception there, only hurt and fear and a desperate kind of pride that kept her spine straight even as tears rolled down her cheeks. "What is your name?" he asked. "Miranda. Miranda Vale." She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "I am from Virginia. I am 19 years old. I have $5 and I can read and write and do sums and sew and cook. I am a hard worker. I just need a chance to prove it." The determination in her voice stirred something in Dalton. She was not asking for charity, he realized. She was asking for an opportunity. Something about that resonated with him. He had been given a second chance when a rancher named Samuel Greer had found him half dead in the desert after the Comanche raid. Samuel had taught him everything about raising cattle, about being a man of his word, about building something instead of destroying it. "I am Dalton Dawson," he said. "I run a small ranch about 10 miles north of here. I raise cattle and horses." He hesitated, knowing what he was about to offer was either the best or worst decision he had ever made. "I could use help. The work is hard and the pay is not much, but there is a small cabin that belonged to my foreman before he moved on. You could stay there. Earn your keep until you figure out what you want to do next." Hope flared in Miranda's eyes, so bright it almost hurt to look at. But then doubt crept in. "You are offering me work, just like that. You do not even know me." "No," Dalton agreed. "But I was just in there praying for direction, and then you appeared on these steps needing help. I am not fool enough to ignore what might be an answer to prayer." He paused. "I will be plain with you, Miss Vale. I am offering honest work for honest pay, nothing more. You will have your own space and your privacy. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or want to move on, I will bring you back to town and help you find something else. But I think maybe we both could use someone to have faith in us right now." Miranda searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She had been betrayed by men she should have been able to trust, but something in Dalton Dawson's steady gaze made her want to believe him. And what choice did she have, really? She could try to find work in town, but a young woman alone would be prey to every unsavory character for miles. At least this man had been praying in a church. At least he spoke to her with respect. "All right," she said softly. "I will work for you, Mr. Dawson." and I promise you will not regret giving me this chance." Dalton felt relief wash through him, mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation about what he had just done. "I have my horse tied around back. We can ride double to the ranch if that sits all right with you." Miranda had never ridden double with a man before, but she simply nodded. This was her new reality now. She picked up her carpet bag and followed Dalton around the side of the church, where a large bay gelding stood patiently in the shade. The horse was beautiful, well-muscled and clearly well cared for. Dalton secured her bag behind the saddle, then swung up onto the horse's back with an ease that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He reached down for her hand. "Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up. You can ride behind me." Miranda did as instructed, and before she knew it, she was seated behind him on the horse. There was no way to avoid it. She had to hold onto him to keep from falling. Her arms went around his waist, and she could feel the solid warmth of him even through his shirt. Her face heated with embarrassment, but Dalton simply clucked to the horse and they started moving. Fort Sumner fell away behind them as they rode north. The land opened up in vast stretches of brown and gold, dotted with scrub brush and occasional cottonwoods that marked where water ran. The Pecos River cut through the territory to the east, giving life to the ranches and farms that had sprung up in recent years. The sky was impossibly big and blue, so different from the green hills of Virginia that Miranda had to simply stare for long moments. "It is beautiful," she said quietly. "Harsh, but beautiful." "That it is," Dalton agreed. "This land does not forgive mistakes, but it rewards hard work and respect. I have been working my ranch for 5 years now. I have about 300 head of cattle and a dozen horses. It is not much compared to some of the big operations, but it is mine. Built it with my own 2 hands." "Do you have any family?" Miranda asked, then immediately regretted it when she felt him tense. "No, lost them a long time ago." His voice had gone flat. "What about you?" "I have no one now," Miranda said. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. I went to live with my uncle and aunt. They never really wanted me, I think. I was just an obligation. When the banker's son lied about me, it gave them an excuse to be rid of me." Dalton turned his head slightly. "He lied about you. He tried to kiss me at a church social. I pushed him away and ran, but my dress tore on a fence. He told everyone I tried to seduce him. His father is important in the community. My uncle believed him over me." The bitterness was thick in her voice. "So here I am." "I am sorry," Dalton said, and he meant it. He knew what it was like to be powerless against circumstances beyond your control. "For what it is worth, I believe you." Something tight in Miranda's chest loosened slightly. "Thank you." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling Miranda into an almost meditative state. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically. The last 3 days in the wagon had been brutal, sleeping on hard wood, eating stale bread and jerky, enduring her uncle's cold silence and her aunt's disapproving glances. Before that, the week after the incident at the church social had been a nightmare of whispers and accusations. "Do you have any questions about the work?" Dalton asked, pulling her from her thoughts. "What will I be doing? Cooking, mostly, if you do not mind. I am a poor hand in the kitchen. Laundry, mending. I have been paying a woman in town to do my washing, but having someone on the ranch would be easier. If you are willing and able, I could teach you some ranch work too. How to care for the horses, maybe help with the cattle when needed. The more you can do, the more valuable you will be if you decide to seek other work later." It was a generous offer. Many men would have worked her to the bone for little pay. "That sounds more than fair, Mr. Dawson. You can call me Dalton. We are not formal out here." "Then you should call me Miranda." "Miranda," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. It suits you." The ranch came into view about an hour after leaving Fort Sumner. It was modest but well-maintained. A main house built of adobe and wood sat on a small rise. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings spread out around it. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, pumping water into a large trough. The whole operation had an air of careful organization about it. Dalton rode past the main house to a smaller cabin set about 50 yards away. It was simple, just one room from what Miranda could see, but it had a door, windows with real glass, and a small covered porch. "This was where my foreman Jake lived before he saved up enough to buy his own place near Santa Rosa," Dalton explained as he dismounted and then helped Miranda down. "It has a bed, a table, a wood stove. I will bring over some supplies to get you started. There is a well just there." He pointed to a wooden structure near the cabin. "Water is good and cold." Miranda stepped onto the porch and pushed open the door. The inside was dim and dusty, but blessedly clean of vermin. A narrow bed frame with a rope mattress stood against one wall. A small table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. A pot-bellied stove sat in the corner with a few pots, and a skillet hanging on the wall beside it. It was sparse, but it was hers, a place of her own. She turned to find Dalton watching her from the doorway. "It is perfect," she said, meaning it. A slow smile crossed his face, transforming his features. For a moment he looked younger, less burdened. "I am glad you think so. Let me get your bag and I will fetch you some supplies. There is a mattress in the barn I can bring over and blankets. Are you hungry?" As if in response, Miranda's stomach growled loudly. She had not eaten since the night before. Her face reddened, but Dalton just laughed. "Come on up to the house. I will fix you something. It will not be fancy, but it will fill your belly." The main house was larger than Miranda had expected. The front room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, a well-made table, and cabinets clearly built by someone who knew what they were doing. A doorway led to what she assumed was a bedroom. Everything was tidy but had that unmistakable bachelor quality, the sense that function mattered more than comfort. Dalton moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency, slicing bread and cold beef, setting out cheese and butter, pouring fresh milk from a crock into 2 glasses. Miranda sat at the table and watched, feeling strange. This morning she had been bouncing in a wagon toward an unknown fate, and now she was sitting in a cowboy's kitchen about to share a meal with him. "I know this must all seem sudden," Dalton said as he set the food on the table and sat down across from her. "I am still not quite sure what possessed me to offer you work. I do not make a habit of bringing strangers to my ranch." "I am grateful you did," Miranda said. She took a bite of the bread and butter, and it tasted better than anything she could remember. "I do not know what I would have done otherwise." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Dalton said. "At least that is what Father Martinez would say. I am inclined to believe him today." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Miranda snuck glances at her new employer, trying to get a sense of him. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who did hard physical labor every day. But they were also clean, and his nails were trimmed. He had shaved recently, and his dark hair was neatly cut. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that suggested he could handle trouble if it came, but he did not go looking for it. "Can I ask you something?" Miranda ventured. "Sure. You said you were praying for direction." "What did you mean?" Dalton set down his glass and leaned back in his chair. "I have been running this ranch for 5 years, like I said. I have built it from nothing into something sustainable. But lately, I have been wondering what the point of it all is. I work from sunup to sundown. I earn enough to keep going and even save a little. But there is no one to share it with. No family. No real friends, just acquaintances in town. I was asking God if this is really all there is to life, or if I was missing something. And then I showed up on the church steps, Miranda said quietly. And then you showed up on the church steps, Dalton agreed. His dark eyes met hers. I am not saying I have any answers yet, but I figure helping someone who needs it is probably a better use of my energy than sitting around feeling sorry for myself. Miranda felt a wave of emotion rise in her throat. She blinked back tears. You are a good man, Dalton Dawson, better than most I have known. He looked uncomfortable with the praise. I am just trying to do right. Come on, let me get you settled in the cabin properly. Over the next hour, Dalton brought over a clean mattress filled with fresh straw, blankets, and linens that smelled of soap and sunshine, a few more cooking implements, and a box of basic supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, cornmeal, a small precious bag of sugar. He showed her where the chicken coop was and told her she could gather eggs each morning. He pointed out the smokehouse where the bacon and ham were kept. Tomorrow I will show you around the whole ranch properly, he said as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For tonight, just rest. You have been through an ordeal. Miranda stood on the porch of her little cabin and watched him walk back to the main house. She felt as if she had stepped into someone else's life. This morning she had been cast aside, unwanted and afraid. Now she had a place to sleep, food to eat, and honest work waiting for her. And the man who had given her all this had asked for nothing in return except her labor. She went inside and made up the bed with the linens Dalton had provided. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, far better than the pallet she had slept on at her uncle's house. She washed her face in the basin of water from the well, changed into her other dress, and sat at the little table as darkness fell. Through the window, she could see lamplight in Dalton's house. What was he doing now? Was he thinking about her, wondering if he had made a mistake? Or had he already forgotten about her, gone back to his usual evening routine? Miranda did not know, and she was too tired to puzzle it out. She climbed into bed as the last light faded from the sky, pulled the blankets up to her chin, and fell into the deepest sleep she had known in weeks. Dalton stood at his window, looking out at the cabin. A single light burned there briefly before being extinguished. He wondered if Miranda was all right, if she was frightened being alone out here in the wilderness. Part of him wanted to go check on her, but he knew that would be inappropriate. He had given his word that she would have her privacy and her safety. He intended to keep it. He turned away from the window and sat down in his chair by the fireplace. What had he done? Taking in a young woman he did not know, offering her shelter and work. It was reckless. It could cause talk in town. People might get the wrong idea. But when he thought about the fear and hurt in those green eyes, the way she had held herself together even when her world was falling apart, he could not regret his decision. She needed help, and he was in a position to give it. That was all. It did not have to be more complicated than that, except he could still feel the warmth of her arms around him as they rode, the way she had tucked herself against his back so trustingly. He could remember the sound of her voice saying his name. And those were dangerous thoughts for a man who had just promised himself he would keep things professional. Dalton shook his head and stood up. He was overthinking this. Miranda was an employee, nothing more. She would work for him for a while, save her money, and move on to whatever life she wanted to build. And he would go back to his routine, maybe with better meals and cleaner clothes. But as he climbed into his own bed that night, he could not quite convince himself that was how this would go. The rooster crowed just before dawn, and Miranda woke to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch coming to life. Birds singing, horses whinnying in the corral, the distant lowing of cattle. She dressed quickly in her work dress, braided her hair, and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, painting everything in soft gray light. Dalton was already up. She could see him walking toward the barn. He moved with purpose, his stride long and confident. Miranda made her way to the chicken coop and carefully opened the little door. The hens clucked at her indignantly, but did not peck when she reached under them for the eggs. She collected a dozen and carried them carefully back to the cabin in her apron. By the time she had washed and started water heating on the stove for coffee, Dalton knocked on her door. "Morning," he said when she opened it. He looked freshly washed, his hair damp. "Sleep well, better than I have in months," Miranda admitted. "I was just making coffee. Would you like some?" "I would, but come on up to the house. I will show you where everything is and we can have breakfast together. Might as well start as we mean to go on." At the main house, Dalton showed her the larder, the root cellar, the supplies of everything from coffee to lamp oil. He explained his usual routine: up before dawn to check on the stock, breakfast, then working until midday, a quick meal, more work until evening, supper, evening chores, and bed. "I am not expecting you to work from dawn to dark like I do," he said. "But if you could have breakfast ready about an hour after sunup, and supper ready when the sun starts to set, that would be helpful. What you do with the time in between is up to you. Laundry, mending, tending a garden if you want to start one. I will pay you $5 a week plus your room and board." $5 a week was generous for a woman's work, and they both knew it. Miranda felt a rush of gratitude. "That is more than fair. I will earn every penny, I promise." "I believe you," Dalton said. Miranda set about making breakfast with the supplies at hand. She found bacon in the smokehouse, used the eggs she had collected, and made biscuits from scratch. Dalton watched from the table, impressed at how competently she moved around the kitchen. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked. "My mother taught me before she died. Then I did most of the cooking at my uncle's house. My aunt never cared for it." Miranda flipped the bacon expertly. "Do you have any preference for meals? Things you particularly like or dislike?" "I am not picky. Anything that is not burned or still moving is fine by me." Miranda laughed, a light musical sound that made Dalton smile. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and he found himself wanting to hear it again. Breakfast was the best meal Dalton had eaten in years. The biscuits were fluffy and golden, the bacon perfectly crisp, the eggs cooked just right. He told her so, and Miranda blushed with pleasure. "It is nice to cook for someone who appreciates it," she said. "My uncle complained no matter what I made." "Your uncle sounds like a fool," Dalton said bluntly. After breakfast, Dalton showed Miranda around the ranch properly. The barn housed 4 horses in addition to his bay gelding. There was a milk cow, which Miranda would be responsible for milking each morning and evening. The chickens she had already met. He showed her the garden plot where his foreman Jake had once grown vegetables. "It has gone to weeds since he left," Dalton said. "If you want to clear it out and plant something, you are welcome to. Anything you grow, we can eat or preserve for winter." They walked out to see the cattle grazing on the range island. Dalton pointed out landmarks, explained boundaries, talked about his plans to expand the herd when he could afford more breeding stock. Miranda listened, fascinated. She had never thought much about where beef came from beyond the butcher's shop. "It is a lot of work for one person," she observed. "It is," Dalton agreed. "I hire extra hands during roundup and branding, but day to day it is just me. I have made it work, but I will not lie, it would be easier with help." "Well, you have help now," Miranda said. "At least with the house and the cooking and such. That should free up some of your time." Dalton looked at her, this slip of a girl in her worn dress and sturdy boots, and felt something shift in his chest. She was looking at his ranch with interest and intelligence, already thinking of ways to make herself useful. She had been abandoned and betrayed, but there was no self-pity in her, just determination to move forward. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose I do." The days fell into a rhythm. Miranda rose early, gathered eggs, milked the cow, and made breakfast. Dalton ate heartily and complimented her cooking sincerely. She cleaned the house, did laundry in a big tub outside on Mondays, mended his clothes and hers. She cleared the garden plot, working in the early morning and late evening when the heat was less intense, and planted seeds Dalton bought for her on his next trip to town: squash, beans, corn, tomatoes. In the afternoons, when the heat was too intense for hard labor, Miranda would often sit on her porch and sew or read from her Bible. Sometimes, she would see Dalton working in the corral with the horses, training a young mare to saddle, or repairing fence in the distance. He worked with a steady, methodical patience that she found admirable. Dalton, for his part, found himself looking forward to meals more than he should. It was not just the food, though Miranda was an excellent cook. It was the conversation. She was well-read and thoughtful, and she asked intelligent questions about ranching, about the territory, about his life. He found himself telling her things he had not spoken of in years. His childhood in Texas, his family's dreams of building a homestead, the horror of finding them dead, his years of drifting before Samuel Greer saved him. "He sounds like a good man," Miranda said one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house after supper, watching the sun set. It had become something of a ritual, these quiet evening conversations. "The best I ever knew," Dalton said. "He taught me everything that matters. When he died 3 years back, he left me a little money. That is what I used to start this place. I like to think he would be proud of what I have built." "I am sure he would be," Miranda said softly. A month passed, then 2. The garden began to flourish under Miranda's care. She learned to ride, though not well, on the gentlest of Dalton's horses. He taught her to rope, laughing when her first attempt sent the loop flying everywhere but where she aimed. She learned to read the sky for weather, to spot when a cow was in distress, to handle a gun well enough to scare off a coyote. She also learned to read Dalton's moods. She could tell when he was troubled by the set of his shoulders, when he was pleased by the slight softening around his eyes, when he was tired by the way he rubbed the back of his neck. She found herself attuned to him in a way that both comforted and frightened her. For his part, Dalton was fighting a losing battle against his growing feelings for Miranda. She was in his thoughts constantly. The way she hummed while she cooked, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, the way the evening light caught in her auburn hair, the sound of her laughter, the warmth in her green eyes when she looked at him. He told himself it was wrong to feel this way. She was his employee. She trusted him to be honorable. She was 19 to his 32, though the years between them did not feel like so many when they talked. She had been through trauma and needed stability, not romantic complications. But his heart was not listening to his head. It came to a head on a hot afternoon in late August. Dalton had been working on a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree during a storm. Miranda, restless with the heat, had decided to bring him some cool water and the leftover biscuits from breakfast. She found him stripped to the waist, his shirt hanging on a fence post, sweat gleaming on his tanned skin as he wrestled a heavy post into position. Miranda stopped short, her breath catching. She had seen men without shirts before, farm workers and such, but seeing Dalton like this sent a rush of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. Dalton looked up and saw her standing there, a canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle in her hands. For a long moment they just stared at each other. The air seemed to thicken. "I brought you some water," Miranda finally managed. "And biscuits." "Thank you," Dalton said. His voice sounded rough. He grabbed his shirt and pulled it on, though he did not button it. He took the canteen and drank deeply, aware of her eyes on him. Miranda set the biscuits on a nearby stump. She should leave. She should walk back to the house right now, but her feet would not move. "Miranda," Dalton said. There was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "Yes. I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that your position here is secure no matter how you respond." He set down the canteen. "These past 2 months have been the best I can remember in a long time. Not just because you cook well or keep the house clean, because you are here. Because talking with you makes the hard days easier. Because your laugh is the best sound I have ever heard." Miranda's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I have feelings for you," Dalton continued. "Feelings that go beyond employer and employee or even friendship. I know it is not proper. I know you might not feel the same way. I know I probably should not have said anything, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." The world seemed to have narrowed to just the two of them, standing in the bright afternoon sun with the damaged fence and the endless New Mexico sky as witness. "You have feelings for me," Miranda repeated, needing to hear it again. "I do," Dalton said. "Strong ones." Joy burst through Miranda like sunrise. "I have feelings for you too," she said, the words tumbling out. "I have been trying to ignore them because I thought it was just gratitude or because I was being foolish. But it is more than that. When I see you, my heart lifts. When we talk, I never want the conversation to end. When you smile at me, I feel like I could do anything." Dalton crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs gentle on her cheeks. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Miranda breathed. His lips met hers softly, tentatively at first, as if she might break. But when she responded, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the brutal, unwanted kiss the banker's son had tried to force on her. This was warmth and promise and a feeling of coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly. I want everyone to know my intentions are honorable." "What are your intentions?" Miranda asked, though her heart already knew. "To marry you if you will have me. Not right away. I know it is too soon. But eventually, when you are ready, when you are sure." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "I know we have only known each other for 2 months. I know people will talk about how we met, about the difference in our ages, about all of it. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are what I was praying for, Miranda Vale. You are the answer I did not know I needed." Tears streamed down Miranda's face, but for the first time in so long they were tears of happiness. "I will have you," she said. "I do not need to wait to be sure. I already am. You saved me, Dalton. Not just from being alone and scared, but from thinking I would never matter to anyone again. You make me feel valued. You make me feel seen." Dalton kissed her again, and this time there was joy in it, a celebration of something new and precious beginning. They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, grinning at each other like fools. The fence could wait. The world could wait. For now, there was just this, the two of them and the promise of a future together. That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge, Dalton told her stories of his dreams for the ranch, for the family he hoped to build. Miranda shared her own dreams, the things she had never dared to hope for when she was living under her uncle's roof. "I want children," she said softly. "I want a home full of love and laughter. I want to grow old beside someone who values me." "I want all of that too," Dalton said, He squeezed her hand. "I want it with you." Over the following weeks, their courtship blossomed. Dalton brought Miranda wildflowers from the range. She baked his favorite foods and left him little notes in his lunch when he went out to work. They took rides together in the evening when the heat had passed, exploring the land that would be their shared home. They talked about everything: faith, family, hopes, fears, the future. Dalton took Miranda to Fort Sumner to introduce her to Father Martinez, the priest who had become something of a friend to him. The elderly priest smiled knowingly when he saw them together. "So this is the young woman who appeared on the church steps," he said, his Spanish accent warm. I wondered if God might have a plan when Dalton told me the story. "You believe God brought us together?" Miranda asked. "I believe God puts people in our path when we need them most," Father Martinez said. "The rest is up to us. But yes, I think perhaps there was divine providence at work here." They also faced less pleasant reactions. Some of the townspeople whispered about the propriety of a young woman living on a bachelor's ranch. A few suggested that Miranda must have led Dalton astray. Others questioned his judgment in taking in a stranger, but Dalton faced down the gossips with a steady, calm demeanor. "Miss Vale is a woman of impeccable character who was wronged by those who should have protected her," he said firmly to anyone who dared to speak ill of her in his presence. "I intend to marry her with all due respect and honor. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." Word of his defense of her honor spread, and most people backed down. Those who knew Dalton respected his integrity, and those who did not know him learned quickly that he was not a man to cross. In early October, with the heat finally breaking and the leaves on the cottonwoods turning gold, Dalton took Miranda on a ride to a high point on his property where the view stretched for miles. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange and pink. He dismounted and helped her down, then led her to a flat rock that overlooked the valley. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about how you were already sure." "I remember," Miranda said, her heart beginning to race. "The truth is, I was sure the day you agreed to come to this ranch. I knew in my gut that you were meant to be here, and every day since has only confirmed it." He took both her hands in his. "I do not want to wait any more. I want you to be my wife. I want to start our life together." "Will you marry me, Miranda Vale?" Miranda's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Dalton Dawson. I cannot think of anything I want more." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They married 3 weeks later in the same church where Miranda had been abandoned on the steps. Father Martinez performed the ceremony, smiling broadly as he pronounced them man and wife. A handful of townspeople attended, those who had become friendly with Dalton over the years, and those who had warmed to Miranda once they got to know her. Miranda wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Dalton wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving his bride. When he slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hand trembled slightly. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You will never be abandoned again. You will never doubt that you are valued. You are my heart, Miranda." "And you are mine," Miranda whispered. "I promise to stand beside you, to build a life with you, to love you with everything I am." The kiss they shared was witnessed by Father Martinez and their small gathering of guests, but Miranda felt as if the whole world had stopped to mark this moment. She was married. She had a husband who loved her. She had a home. The ranch became truly theirs, not just Dalton's with Miranda as a guest, but their shared space. She moved her things into the main house, into Dalton's bedroom that became their bedroom. The cabin was converted into storage, and eventually a space for hired hands when needed. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet. Dalton was gentle with Miranda, mindful of her innocence and her past hurt. He made her feel cherished and desired in a way that erased the ugly memory of the banker's son's attack. In his arms, she felt safe and loved. As fall turned to winter, they settled into married life. Miranda proved to be not just a good cook and housekeeper, but a true partner in running the ranch. She had a head for numbers and took over the bookkeeping. She learned to spot when a cow was going to calve and helped Dalton deliver several healthy calves. She even proved to be a decent shot with a rifle, which came in handy when coyotes threatened the chickens. Dalton had never been happier. Coming home to Miranda every evening, sharing meals with her, holding her in his arms at night, hearing her thoughts and dreams, watching her make their house into a true home, all of it filled a void in his life he had not fully realized existed. They faced challenges, of course. A hard freeze in January killed several head of cattle. A dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights required careful negotiation. Miranda fell ill with a fever in February that had Dalton terrified until it broke after 3 anxious days. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. In early spring, Miranda began to suspect she might be with child. She waited to be sure, counting the weeks, noting the changes in her body. When she was certain, she chose a beautiful evening in late April to tell Dalton. She had made his favorite meal: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie. As they sat on the porch after supper, watching the stars emerge, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "You are going to be a father," she said softly. Dalton's eyes went wide. "Truly, truly." "I think the baby will come in November." A grin spread across his face, wide and joyful. He pulled her into his lap and held her close. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Miranda asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Dalton said. "I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am grateful. I am so deeply in love with you, and now we are bringing a child into the world." He kissed her temple. "You have given me everything, Miranda, everything I ever wanted and more than I knew to ask for." "You gave me my life back," Miranda said. "You gave me a home and love and purpose. This baby is a gift we are giving to each other." The pregnancy was not easy. Miranda suffered from sickness in the early months and exhaustion throughout. Dalton hired a woman from town to help with the heavier chores and hovered over Miranda anxiously. She laughed at his worrying but also loved him for it. As her belly grew, Dalton would talk to the baby, his hand resting gently on her stomach, telling stories about the ranch and making promises about the life they would give this child. Miranda would stroke his hair and feel her heart swell with love for this man who had become her whole world. In mid-November, on a cold, clear night with a million stars overhead, Miranda went into labor. Dalton rode hard to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Ruth, who had delivered half the babies in the county. Ruth examined Miranda and declared everything was progressing normally, though it would likely be a long labor for a first baby. It was long. Miranda labored through the night and into the next day. Dalton stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. When she screamed in pain, he felt each cry like a knife to his heart. When she squeezed his hand so hard he thought his bones might break, he never flinched. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Ruth announced it was time to push. Miranda, exhausted and in agony, gathered her strength and bore down. Dalton supported her back, his voice in her ear, telling her she could do this, that she was strong, that he loved her. And then a baby's cry filled the room. "It is a boy," Ruth announced, holding up the squalling infant. A healthy baby boy. Dalton felt tears streaming down his face as Ruth cleaned the baby and placed him in Miranda's arms. Miranda, her hair plastered to her head with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion, looked down at their son with wonder. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." The baby had dark hair like his father, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they seemed to be a stormy gray blue. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a lusty cry that suggested strong lungs. "What should we name him?" Dalton asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. "I was thinking David," Miranda said. "David Dawson. It means beloved." "David," Dalton repeated. He touched his son's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. "David Dawson, it is perfect." Ruth cleaned Miranda up and got her settled in bed with the baby. She showed Miranda how to nurse, and when little David latched on and began to suckle, Miranda laughed with delight and relief. Dalton sat beside them, his arm around Miranda, watching his son nurse. "I never knew I could feel this much," he said quietly. "I thought I understood love when I married you, but this—" He shook his head, unable to find words. "I know," Miranda said, leaning against him. "It is almost too much to hold." Over the following weeks, they adjusted to life with a baby. David was a good baby, healthy and generally content, though he had his fussy moments like any infant. Miranda recovered well from the birth, regaining her strength. Dalton proved to be a devoted father, changing soiled cloths without complaint, walking the floor with David when he cried in the night, singing off-key lullabies that made Miranda smile. The ranch thrived. Dalton's careful management and hard work paid off. The herd grew. The horses he bred gained a reputation for quality. Money was not plentiful, but it was steady, and they were able to save and even make improvements to the house. When David was 6 months old, Dalton built an addition onto the house, a bedroom for their son. He crafted a cradle from wood he had been saving, sanding it smooth and carving a simple design of horses on the headboard. "For our cowboy," he said when he showed it to Miranda. She ran her fingers over the carving, tears in her eyes. "It is beautiful. You made this with your own hands for our son. He will treasure it someday." Life settled into a new rhythm. Miranda cared for David and the household, finding joy in watching her son grow and change. Dalton worked the ranch and played with his son in the evenings, delighting in each new milestone. The first smile, the first laugh, the first time David rolled over. On their second wedding anniversary, Dalton surprised Miranda with a trip to Fort Sumner. He had arranged for Ruth to watch David for the day. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, a rare luxury. They visited the general store where Dalton bought Miranda a beautiful shawl she had admired. They stopped at the church to light candles and give thanks. As they sat together in the quiet sanctuary, Miranda thought back to the day she had been abandoned on these very steps. She had been so afraid, so alone, so certain her life was over. And then Dalton had opened the door. Dalton, who had been inside praying for direction, for purpose, for something more than the lonely existence he had been living. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked softly. "About how God answered both our prayers that day," Miranda said. "You were asking for direction, and I was praying someone would help me. We found each other when we both needed it most." Dalton took her hand. "Best answer to prayer I ever received." They returned home to find David napping peacefully in Ruth's arms. After thanking her and seeing her off, they stood together over their son's cradle, watching him sleep. "You think he will have brothers and sisters?" Dalton asked. Miranda smiled. "I hope so. I think David would like that." Good, Dalton said. Because I have been thinking our house could use more laughter, more joy, more love. Our house is already full of love, Miranda said. But she leaned into him, and they both knew there was always room for more. 2 years later, Miranda gave birth to a daughter they named Daisy. She had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes. David, now a sturdy 2-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything from feeding to changing to rocking her to sleep. The ranch continued to prosper. Dalton took on a permanent hired hand, a young man named Tom who was eager to learn the cattle business. With Tom's help, Dalton was able to spend more time with his family while still running the ranch efficiently. Miranda started teaching David his letters and numbers. She read to both children every evening, stories from the Bible and from the few books they owned. Dalton would sit with them, Daisy on his lap and David pressed against his side, and feel a contentment so deep it almost frightened him. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he would think about the man he had been before Miranda. Lonely, going through the motions, wondering if his life had any real meaning. And then he would look at his wife and children, at the home they had built together, and know that everything he had gone through had led him to this. Miranda, too, would sometimes think about her old life. The coldness of her uncle's house, the shame and fear that had followed the banker's son's lies, the terror of being abandoned in a strange town. But those memories had lost their power to hurt her. They were just shadows of a past that had brought her to Dalton, to this life, to this love. When David was 5 and Daisy 3, Miranda discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was older now, 26, and she felt every ache and pain. But when their 3rd child arrived, another boy they named Daniel, the difficulty was forgotten in the joy of holding a new life. Daniel was quieter than his siblings, more thoughtful. He had Dalton's dark coloring and Miranda's green eyes, a striking combination. David appointed himself his little brother's protector, and Daisy treated the baby like her own personal doll, always wanting to hold him and sing to him. The house was chaotic and loud and full to bursting with life. Dalton built another addition, creating more sleeping space and a larger kitchen. Miranda sewed clothes and quilts, cooked enormous meals, refereed squabbles, and kissed scraped knees. They were busy and sometimes exhausted, but they were happy. As the years passed, the children grew. David showed a natural talent with horses like his father. Daisy had her mother's way in the kitchen and could cook a decent meal by the time she was 8. Daniel loved books and learning, spending hours puzzling over the words in every book he could get his hands on. Dalton taught his children about hard work and integrity, about respecting the land and the animals in their care, about keeping their word and treating others with fairness. Miranda taught them about compassion and faith, about the importance of family, about how God could bring good out of even the darkest circumstances. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton and Miranda took an evening walk together, leaving the children in the care of Tom's wife, Sarah. They climbed to the high point where Dalton had proposed and stood looking out over the land in the fading light. 10 years, Miranda said. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me on those church steps. Sometimes it feels like I have known you my whole life. We have built something good here, Dalton said. Not just the ranch, but our family, our life together. I never imagined I could be this happy, Miranda said. When my uncle left me in Fort Sumner, I thought my life was over. I could not see how anything good could come from such cruelty. But it did, Dalton said. Not because of the cruelty, but in spite of it. You were strong enough and brave enough to take a chance on a stranger who offered you hope. And you were kind enough and faithful enough to offer that hope, Miranda said. She turned to face him, taking both his hands. "You saved me, Dalton, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Dalton said. He pulled her close. "I was lost before you, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You gave me purpose and joy and love. You gave me a family. You gave me everything that matters." They stood together as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them on their wedding night, on the nights their children were born, on countless evenings of their life together. The years continued to pass. The children grew into teenagers, then young adults. David took over more and more of the ranch work, showing every sign of being an even better cattleman than his father. Daisy married a schoolteacher from Fort Sumner and gave Dalton and Miranda their first grandchild, a bright-eyed little girl named Miranda after her grandmother. Daniel went east to study law, writing long letters home about his studies and his life in the city. Dalton's hair went gray at the temples. Miranda found lines around her eyes and mouth, etched by years of smiling and laughing. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the frightened young woman on the church steps and the lonely cowboy who had offered her a chance. They still felt the spark that had ignited that hot August afternoon by the broken fence. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Father Martinez, now very elderly but still sharp as ever, came to the ranch to bless their home and give thanks for their marriage. The whole family gathered, David with his new wife Emily, Daisy with her husband Robert and their 3 children, Daniel home from law school. "25 years ago I married you two in my church," Father Martinez said, his voice still strong despite his age. "I remember thinking that God had brought you together in such an unusual way. A woman abandoned, a man searching for meaning, and look what has come of it." He gestured to the assembled family, to the thriving ranch beyond the windows. "A legacy of love and faith. Children and grandchildren who will carry your values forward. This is what happens when we trust in God's plan, even when we cannot see it." That evening, after the family celebration had wound down and the house had quieted, Dalton and Miranda sat on their porch. It was the same porch where they had shared so many conversations over the years, where they had courted and dreamed and planned their future. "You remember what you were praying for that day in the church?" Miranda asked. "Direction," Dalton said. "Purpose. Something more than the loneliness I had been living with. And I was praying for someone to help me, to see me as more than the lies that had been told about me. God answered both of us," Dalton said, "in ways neither of us could have imagined." Miranda leaned her head on his shoulder. "I would not change a single thing, not the hardship that brought me here, not the fear, not any of it, because it all led to this, to you, to our family, to this life we have built together." "Neither would I," Dalton said. He kissed the top of her head. "You are still the answer to my prayers, Miranda Dawson. Every single day." They sat together as the night deepened around them, watching the stars come out one by one over the New Mexico territory they called home. Inside the house, they could hear the sound of their children and grandchildren talking and laughing, the sound of family, the sound of love passed down through generations. Neither of them knew how many years they had left together. But they knew that however much time God gave them, they would face it the same way they had faced the last 25 years. Together, with love and faith and gratitude for the miraculous way their paths had crossed. The ranch would continue. The family would grow. The legacy they had built would outlive them both. But in this moment, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of being together. The cowboy and the woman he had found on the church steps, still in love after all these years. As Miranda looked up at the stars, she thought about the frightened 19-year-old girl she had been, abandoned and alone. If she could speak to that girl now, she would tell her not to be afraid. She would tell her that the darkest moment was about to give way to light. She would tell her that inside the church, a good man was praying for exactly what she needed, and she was exactly the answer to his prayer. She would tell her that love was coming, that home was coming, that everything would be all right, and it had been, it was, it would continue to be. Dalton's arm tightened around her, and Miranda smiled. 25 years, and his touch still made her heart race. 25 years, and she still sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this life was real, that she was truly this blessed. "What are you smiling about?" Dalton asked. "Everything," Miranda said. "Absolutely everything." And as the New Mexico stars wheeled overhead and the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, Dalton and Miranda Dawson sat together on their porch, exactly where they belonged, living proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are doorways to the best. That sometimes being abandoned is the first step toward being found, and that prayers whispered in dark churches are heard and answered in ways more wonderful than we dare to imagine. Their story, which had begun with fear and loneliness and a desperate prayer on both sides, had become a testament to love, faith, and the beautiful mystery of two souls finding each other exactly when they needed to most. And it would echo through the generations to come, a reminder that even in the hardest times, hope is real and love is possible, and happy endings do exist. In the Wild West of 1878, on the steps of a church in Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory, a woman had been abandoned. Inside, a cowboy had been praying, and from that moment of desperation and hope, a love story for the ages had been born. Now, 25 years later, that love was stronger than ever, having weathered storms and hardship and the simple passing of time. It had produced children and grandchildren, had built a ranch and a legacy, had proven that God's plans are indeed perfect, even when we cannot see the path. As Miranda dozed against Dalton's shoulder and he held her close under the endless stars, both of them felt the same deep peace, the same profound gratitude. They had been lost, and they had been found. They had been alone, and now they had each other and the family they had created. They had been searching for meaning, and they had discovered it in the simple act of loving and being loved. The cowboy who had been praying in the church that day had found his answer. The woman abandoned on the steps had found her salvation. Together, they had found everything they needed and more than they had ever dared to dream. And that, in the end, was the greatest blessing of all.